The rain over the abandoned rail yard didn't just fall, it stung like broken glass. In the center of the muddy, desolate lot, a thick steel cable noose snapped taut, biting viciously into the heavy fur of an aging German shepherd. The dog didn't bark. He didn't growl. There was only a wet, ragged gasp as the metal loop crushed his windpipe, forcing his one good eye to roll back in pain. "Hold the old man down," Miller barked, his expensive leather trench coat splattered with gray sludge. He watched with cold, detached amusement as his two burly security guards shoved 65-year-old Max face first into the freezing mud. With a heavy stomp of his boot, Miller crushed a weathered leather collar embroidered with the serial number K9-04 into a rusted trash can nearby. "This town has no room for monsters. Tomorrow this mutt gets put down," Max screamed, his voice raw and breaking, his single prosthetic wooden arm digging uselessly into the gravel as he watched his closest companion being dragged away like a piece of dead meat. They looked at the old man in worn-out clothes and the limping, half-blind dog, and they saw society's garbage. They saw the jagged scars on the animal's back and called him a dangerous beast that needed to be destroyed. But they didn't know that the monster they were choking held the rank of an honorary master sergeant in the United States military, and that his missing left eye was the exact price paid to pull 400 American soldiers out of a bloodbath 10 years ago. The edge of Oak Haven town was where utility went to die. Past the automated factories and the high-end residential developments sat the old industrial sector, a maze of collapsing brick warehouses, overgrown weeds, and rusted corrugated iron. It was a place where people threw away things they no longer wanted to look at, and that was exactly why Max and Rex lived there. Inside a drafty, abandoned shipping depot at the far corner of the lot, the wind howled through the cracked window panes, carrying the faint scent of diesel fuel and damp earth. This was their sanctuary. It was a space measuring less than 200 square feet, furnished with nothing but a rusted iron cot, a small propane stove, and a pile of heavy olive-drab military wool blankets in the corner. Max was 65 years old, but the deep, leathered lines on his face made him look 80. His hair was a stark, chaotic white, and a jagged piece of shrapnel scar tore through his left eyebrow, trailing down to his jawline. His right sleeve was permanently pinned to his chest. His arm had been replaced by a crude, heavy wooden prosthetic he'd carved himself from an old oak branch. He walked with a heavy, rhythmic drag of his left boot, a souvenir from a mortar blast in a valley whose name he could no longer pronounce without shaking. But Max never walked alone. Tight against his right knee, moving like a silent, furry shadow, was Rex. Rex was a standard-issue German shepherd, but the war had redesigned him. His left eye was gone, replaced by a thick, pale crescent scar that ran from his ear to his muzzle, leaving the socket permanently closed and clouded. His rear right leg was crooked, shorter than the others, causing him to walk with a distinct sympathetic limp that perfectly mirrored Max's own stride. When they moved together through the warehouse, it sounded like a single broken machine. Thud drag, click limp. They were two fragments of a forgotten conflict, left to decay in the shadows of a country that had moved on to newer, cleaner things. Every morning at precisely 0500 hours, a habit the military had drilled into Max's bones 40 years ago, the old man would sit up on his cot. The transition from sleep to waking was always a battlefield. Max's heart would hammer against his ribs, his forehead drenched in cold sweat from the nightmares of PTSD that haunted his nights. In those dark, suffocating moments, he wouldn't see the warehouse. He would see the burning red dust of the desert, hear the screaming of young boys, and feel the ground dissolving beneath him. But before the panic could swallow him whole, a heavy, wet nose would press firmly against his bare ankle. Rex would lean his entire 80-pound frame against Max's trembling leg, applying a steady, grounding pressure. The old dog would look up with his one remaining amber eye, an eye filled with an ancient, unwavering intelligence. He didn't whine or pace. He simply breathed with his master, a slow, deep rise and fall of his chest, serving as a living anchor until the ghosts in Max's head retreated back into the dark. "I'm okay, boy," Max would whisper, his voice a gravelly rasp as his rough hand found the thick fur behind Rex's ears. "I'm right here. We're safe." Their daily survival was a quiet routine of sacrifice. Max's monthly veteran disability check was pathetic, barely enough to cover the rent of the derelict warehouse space. Every dollar was a choice. Max would walk 3 miles to the local discount market, his wooden arm tucked into his coat, to buy the expensive, high-grade glucosamine supplements Rex needed for his deteriorating joints. For himself, Max bought stale bread, dented cans of beans, and cheap black coffee. He didn't mind the hunger. As long as Rex's coat remained thick and his one good eye remained clear, Max considered himself a wealthy man. To the rest of the town, however, they were an eyesore. The local teenagers called Max the Ghost, throwing rocks at the warehouse doors just to hear Rex bark. The local shopkeepers would turn their signs to "closed" whenever they saw the old man and his scarred dog approaching the sidewalk. They didn't see the bronze stars or the commendations hidden in the old footlocker beneath the cot. They only saw a broken old man and a crippled, terrifying dog with a scarred face. They called Rex a monster because he didn't behave like a normal pet. He didn't wag his tail for strangers. He never barked at passing cars. And his gaze was always too intense, always scanning the tree lines and the rooftops for threats that no one else could see. It was the survival instinct of a Tier 1 K9 handler and his scout dog, a bond forged in blood and fire, completely misunderstood by a town that measured value only by appearance. Max rubbed the dog's scarred muzzle, unaware that outside the rusted gates, the sound of a luxury sedan's tires gripping the gravel was about to bring the cold reality of the world crashing down upon their peaceful isolation. The peace of the drafty warehouse did not last. The heavy iron gates at the entrance of the lot groaned as they were thrown open, the hinges screaming against decades of rust. A sleek, midnight black luxury sedan cut through the downpour, its heavy tires crunching aggressively over the gravel and pooling water. It stopped dead directly in front of the warehouse doors, its engine purring with a quiet, expensive arrogance. Inside the dim structure, Rex's ears instantly went flat against his skull. A low, vibrating rumble started deep within his chest, a sub-audible warning vibration that Max felt through the soles of his boots before he even heard it. The sedan's door opened, and Arthur Miller stepped out. He was a man who wore his immense wealth like armor, wrapped in a tailored cashmere coat and a pristine silk scarf, with heavy gold rings that caught the bleak gray light of the storm. Behind him stood 2 massive private security guards wearing tactical vests, their expressions hidden behind dark sunglasses despite the gloom of the afternoon. Miller did not look down at the mud ruining his Italian leather shoes. His eyes were fixed entirely on the dilapidated building. "Max!" Miller's voice echoed through the metal structure before he even crossed the threshold. He pushed the rusted sliding door open with a violent shove, letting a blast of freezing rain and wind sweep into the small living space, upsetting the neatly stacked tin cans on the counter. "I know you're in here. We need to wrap this up today." Max stood up slowly, his joints popping with a dull stiffness. His heavy wooden prosthetic arm hung rigidly by his side as he stepped out from the small curtained bedroom area onto the main warehouse floor. Rex stayed exactly half a step behind his right heel, his single amber eye locked onto the 3 intruders, his body completely rigid. "Miller," Max said, his voice flat and devoid of any warmth. "My lease doesn't expire for another 6 months. I paid the rent on the 1st of the month. You have no legal business on this property. Miller pulled a crisp white document from his interior coat pocket, snapping it open with a sharp flick of his wrist. "The lease is void, old man. I've got an emergency eviction order right here signed by the city council. This entire industrial sector has been rezoned for commercial high-rises. The bulldozers roll in at dawn tomorrow." "You can't do that," Max said, his single flesh-and-blood fist tightening until his knuckles turned white. "The law requires a proper 90-day notice for zoning displacement. I have nowhere to take him." He glanced down at the scarred dog at his hip. "The law has specific clauses for public safety, Max," Miller sneered, a cold, calculated smile spreading across his face. He gestured aggressively with the paper. "I have signed affidavits from 3 families in the adjacent neighborhood. They claim you are harboring a public menace, a vicious, feral animal that stalks the perimeter fence and terrorizes children. He's a retired military scout dog." Max's voice finally broke its calm, rising to a defensive shout that vibrated against the metal walls. "He doesn't stalk anyone. He stays on this property. He is less of a threat to this town than the mercenaries you brought with you." Miller did not answer immediately. His gaze drifted down to Rex. He looked at the clouded, scarred eye socket, the crooked, shortened hind leg, and the deep ridges of missing fur along the dog's spine where shrapnel had torn through. A look of intense physical revulsion crossed the developer's face. He leaned heavily on a pristine titanium golf driver he used as a walking cane, tapping the hard metal head rhythmically against the concrete floor. Clack, clack, clack. "Look at it," Miller whispered, his voice dripping with pure malice. "It's a freak. A broken, unstable weapon left over from a war nobody cares about anymore. It belongs in a shelter dumpster, not a residential development zone. It's a liability to my multi-million-dollar project." Before Max could step forward to intervene, Miller took a sudden, aggressive stride into their personal living space. He raised the titanium golf club and deliberately drove the hard metal head into Rex's deformed hind leg. The blow was sharp, heavy, and cruel. Rex did not yelp. Combat K9s were bred to suppress vocal expressions of pain, but his entire body flinched violently, his crooked leg buckling beneath him as he hit the concrete. Instantly, the dog's tactical conditioning took over. Seeing his master's territory violated and experiencing a direct, unprovoked attack, Rex exploded into motion. He bared his yellow teeth, his upper lip curling into a terrifying, blood-chilling snarl as he lunged forward, placing his heavy torso directly between Miller and Max. "See?" Miller shrieked, his fake panic turning into an immediate, calculated opportunity. He scrambled backward behind his 2 guards, tripping over his own long coat. "It's rapid! The beast is trying to attack a civilian! Guards, neutralize! It is immediately!" "No! Rex, hold! Down!" Max screamed the commands in both English and his old military handler jargon, throwing his frail body forward to grab Rex's makeshift rope collar with his single hand. But Miller's guards were already moving with professional malice. They had not come to protect Miller. They had brought specific containment equipment for this exact scenario. The first guard reached into his tactical belt and pulled out a heavy professional animal control pole, a thick steel rod with a braided steel wire noose at the end. Before Rex could retreat back to Max's side, the guard swung the pole with practiced precision. The loop of braided wire slipped over Rex's head and slammed shut around his throat with a terrifying metallic click. Rex let out a strangled, choked gasp as the steel cable crushed into his windpipe, cutting off his breath. The second guard moved in instantly, drawing a heavy, hard plastic riot baton from his belt. He brought the weapon down with a sickening thud across Rex's exposed ribs, sending the 80-pound dog crashing sideways into the dirt floor. "Stop it! You're killing him!" Max roared. He lunged at the first guard, trying to use his single good hand to rip the steel pole away from the man's grip. But 65 years of age and a missing arm were no match for a young, armored mercenary. The second guard turned and backhanded Max across the face with his free, gloved hand. The force of the blow split Max's old shrapnel scar open, sending the old man tumbling into the mud beside his iron cot. His vision blurred instantly, a mixture of cold rain and warm, dark blood pouring down his face. "A pathetic old cripple raising a mad dog," Miller said, walking back over to where Rex was thrashing violently on the ground, his single amber eye wide with suffocating terror as the steel cable choked the air from his lungs. Miller looked down at Max, who was struggling to rise in the mud. "You veterans think because you bled for this country decades ago, the world owes you a free ride forever. It doesn't. Progress doesn't care about your medals." Miller reached down into the dirt and grabbed the worn leather collar that had slipped off Rex's neck during the violent struggle. He looked at the rusted brass plate, his thumb brushing over the engraved serial number K9-04. "Trash belongs with trash," Miller muttered coldly. With a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed the military collar into a nearby rusted steel drum, filled with burning timber and debris that his workers had ignited outside the door. "Tomorrow morning, the bulldozers level this entire lot," Miller announced, turning his back on the weeping old man without a hint of remorse. "Take the mutt to the local high kill shelter. Tell the director it bit a corporate executive. They'll have it lethal injected by midnight." The guards began dragging Rex backward out of the warehouse door, his paws clawing uselessly at the concrete, leaving thick streaks of blood and fur in the dirt as the heavy rain swallowed their screams. The cold mud filled Max's mouth, but the metallic taste of iron-rich blood pouring from his split eyebrow was much sharper. Through the violent ringing in his ears and the relentless, deafening drumming of the downpour, he could hear the suffocating wet gasps of his dog. Rex was being dragged ruthlessly across the gravel lot, his heavy claws digging uselessly into the wet dirt, leaving deep, jagged trenches behind him. One guard held the steel catch pole twisted brutally tight, while the other raised a heavy black plastic riot baton high into the air, aiming directly for the dog's remaining good amber eye to blind him completely. Max did not think. 40 years of military conditioning did not leave room for the hesitation or self-preservation when a brother-in-arms was about to be executed in the dirt. With a raw, guttural roar that tore through his throat, the 65-year-old veteran scrambled forward on his knees and stomach. His hand-carved wooden prosthetic arm caught on a sharp piece of an old iron railway track, splintering violently with a loud crack, but he did not even feel the pain. Just as the mercenary brought the heavy plastic baton down with full, bone-crushing force, Max threw his entire upper torso directly over Rex's convulsing body. Thud! The solid plastic baton struck Max squarely across his thin shoulder blades. The impact was sickening, a dull, heavy crack that instantly forced all the air from the old man's lungs. Max collapsed flat onto Rex, his chest pinning the thrashing dog into the freezing mud, using his own scarred back as a literal ballistic shield against the violence of the guards. "Stop! Hold up! You're hitting the old man!" the guard holding the catchpole shouted, his arm freezing midair as he looked down at the bleeding veteran. "He chose to get in the way." Miller's voice drifted over from the dry, illuminated safety of the warehouse awning, completely cold and entirely bored. He didn't even look up from his phone. "Give him another second to move. If he stays, treat him like the animal. I don't have all day to waste on a derelict property." Max did not move a single inch. He wrapped his single flesh and blood arm around Rex's massive neck, pulling the German Shepherd's head tightly against his own chest, tucking the dog's exposed, choked throat beneath his chin. His body was trembling violently, his vision flashing with blinding white streaks from the agonizing pain radiating down his spine, but his grip remained an unbreakable vice. Beneath him, Rex's survival instincts were howling. The dog could smell the fresh, hot blood of his master pouring directly onto his matted fur. His powerful jaws twitched, his massive shoulder muscles bunching with a terrifying strength to violently rip the catchpole from the guards' hands and tear the throats out of the men threatening them. But Max leaned his entire weight into the dog's flattened ear, his voice dropping into a desperate, breaking whisper that barely carried over the storm. "Hold, Rex. Hold. Stay down," Max choked out, his warm breath mixing with the freezing rain on the dog's face. "Don't bite. If you bite, they win. They'll shoot you right here, boy. Look at me. Stay down. That's an order, Sergeant. That's an order from your handler." Hearing the word sergeant, the honorary rank given to him by a platoon that had crossed the burning sands of the desert, Rex froze. The dangerous, lethal snarl slowly died in his throat. His ears pinned back completely flat against his skull, and his single amber eye looked up into Max's face through the darkness. Instead of fighting, the old dog did something that broke the mercenary guard's resolve. He reached up his rough gray muzzle and gently, weakly licked the stream of blood running down Max's cheek. It was a silent submission, not to the cruelty of Miller or the clubs of the guards, but to the love and command of his handler. They were two broken soldiers, wrapped around each other in a muddy ditch, completely helpless against the corporate greed of the world outside. The guard with the plastic baton slowly lowered his weapon, looking over at Miller with a sudden heavy wave of unease. "Sir, the old man is bleeding pretty bad from his head. If we keep hitting him, this becomes a homicide case. The local police will get involved, and the press will start looking into the displacement permits." Miller took a long, slow draw from his cigar, the tip glowing a cruel, bright orange against the gray rain. He looked over at the rusted steel drum nearby, where Rex's authentic military leather collar was currently melting into a pool of toxic black ash, the foul smell of burning leather filling the air. He checked his solid gold watch, spat into the mud, and sneered. "Fine," Miller muttered, adjusting his cashmere collar to block the wind. "Don't waste any more time beating a corpse. Just throw the dog in the back of the transport truck and lock the cage. If the old man wants to starve to death in the rain without his mutt, let him. The bulldozers arrive at 0600 sharp. If he's still on the grid by then, bury him with the bricks." The security guards reached down, their heavy, gloved hands wrapping violently around Max's fragile shoulders to tear his bleeding body away from Rex's neck. Max clamped his single, raw fist deeper into the dog's thick, wet coat, his teeth gritting so hard they threatened to shatter against the blinding agony radiating down his spine. In the background, the rusted metal doors of the security transport van rattled open, a dark, yawning steel cage waiting to swallow the old K9 forever. Miller was already turning away, adjusting his gold rings and wiping a stray drop of rain from his cheek, completely indifferent to the destruction behind him. Then, the puddles began to dance. It was not a gentle ripple from the falling rain. It was a violent, rhythmic vibration that shuddered through the deep concrete foundations of the abandoned rail yard. A low, thunderous mechanical bass note shook the air, a heavy, guttural frequency that every combat veteran recognized in the center of their bones. This was not the slow, clunky grinding of commercial bulldozers or excavators. This was the synchronized, high-horsepower growl of heavy-duty, military-grade turbo-diesel engines moving at extreme velocity. Before Miller's guards could lift the old man an inch off the dog, the rusted iron perimeter gates of the rail yard did not just open, they were completely obliterated. A massive, multi-ton, matte black armored Bearcat vehicle rammed straight through the reinforced steel barriers, sending sheets of twisted iron, concrete chunks, and broken padlocks flying into the gravel. Behind it, a swift, terrifying convoy of 6 midnight black tactical SUVs tore into the lot at breakneck speed. They did not slow down. They drifted violently across the wet clay, their heavy off-road tires spraying walls of mud as they executed a flawless, synchronized tactical box formation, completely locking Miller, his luxury sedan, and his guards inside a cage of steel. High-intensity LED spotlights and strobe arrays erupted from the roofs of the vehicles. The blinding blue-white beams cut through the torrential storm like lances of solid light, instantly erasing the darkness of the afternoon and pinning the 3 intruders in place. "Federal tactical units, stay exactly where you are. Drop your weapons and hit the ground," a voice roared through a vehicle-mounted PA system, deep, amplified, and entirely non-negotiable. The heavy doors of the SUVs threw open in perfect unison. Out poured 24 heavily armed operators from the Federal Joint K-9 Task Force and Special Operations. They wore full black ballistic armor, their identities completely hidden behind grim matte black helmets and tactical respirators. In their hands were suppressed assault rifles, and within a fraction of a second, a dozen shifting red and green laser apertures were dancing aggressively across the chests and foreheads of Miller's private security detail. Miller froze dead in his tracks. The expensive cigar dropped from his lips, landing in a muddy puddle with a soft, pathetic hiss. His 2 guards immediately released their grip on Max, their hands flying high into the air as their heavy plastic riot batons dropped uselessly into the dirt. They were trained to bully a lone, disabled veteran in the dark, not to face a Tier 1 federal military raid. From the center of the armored convoy, a heavily modified, reinforced Suburban came to a harsh halt. The thick passenger door swung open, and a pair of pristine, mirror-polished military leather flight boots stepped directly into the gray sludge. General Thompson walked out. 4 silver stars gleamed brilliantly on the collar of his heavy waterproof tactical coat, catching the stark white glare of the floodlights. His face was a mask of cold stone, his gray eyes scanning the layout of the yard with the terrifying precision of a combat radar. He did not look at Miller. He did not look at the luxury sports car. His gaze went straight past them, tracking the thick, dark trail of blood in the dirt until it rested on the edge of the drainage ditch. There, lying face down in the freezing muck, was Max, his fragile, elderly body still draped protectively over the half-blind German shepherd, his white hair stained with crimson. The general's jaw tightened so hard, the muscle leaped visibly in his weathered cheek. He walked forward, the heavily armed operators parting instantly to clear his path, their tactical boots stomping heavily against the wet gravel in a terrifying rhythm. The only sound left in the rail yard was the steady, ominous wail of the low-frequency tactical sirens echoing off the empty brick walls. The elite forces had taken the field, and the rich man's playground was about to become a military tribunal. General Thompson did not care about the cold mud soaking through the pristine fabric of his dress uniform. He did not care about the tactical operators watching him in stunned silence, or the security van's cameras recording his every movement. He slowly sank to his knees in the freezing clay, his heavy, leather-gloved hand reaching out to gently touch the wet, matted fur on Rex's neck. As his fingers brushed against the raw, jagged flesh where the steel wire had cut deep, the sound of the autumn rain over the rail yard began to fade. The heavy drumming of the water on corrugated iron transformed into a different kind of thunder. The smell of cold mud and burning trash vanished, replaced by the choking, sulfurous heat of the desert, the scent of burning copper, and the high-pitched, terrifying rattle of automatic gunfire. 10 years ago, Helmand Province, a desolate gorge known in military intelligence only as Valley 7. The sun was a blinding, white-hot coin in a bruised sky, baking the rocky cliffs until the air rippled with heat waves. At the bottom of the gorge, 400 young soldiers from the 2nd Battalion were trapped in a textbook kill zone. They had been led into the narrow valley by faulty intelligence reports, and the moment their armored vehicles reached the center, the ridge lines on 3 sides erupted in fire. Rocket-propelled grenades tore through the lead transports, turning millions of dollars of machinery into burning metal coffins. Colonel Thompson, as he was known then, lay pressed against a crumbling boulder, his radio headset screaming with the frantic voices of dying boy soldiers. Mortar shells were raining down from the high cliffs, walking their explosions closer and closer to his position with every passing second. "We're locked down, leader," a young platoon sergeant screamed into the comms, his voice cracking with pure terror. "We try to push forward. We hit pressure plates. The entire valley floor is a minefield. We try to fall back. They've got the exit pre-registered for heavy artillery." To make matters worse, the enemy was using high-power electronic warfare systems. The battalion's advanced electronic minesweeping equipment was completely jammed, the digital screens flickering with useless static. Every time a soldier took a step to find cover, the ground exploded beneath them. Casualties were mounting rapidly, and the air was thick with the copper smell of blood and the agonizing screams of young men. They were entirely out of options. They were waiting to be slaughtered. Then, Master Sergeant Max stepped up to the colonel's position. 10 years ago, Max's hair wasn't white. It was a sharp military buzz cut, and he still possessed his right arm. Beside him, crouching low to the burning sand, was Rex. At 2 years old, Rex was a magnificent specimen of a German shepherd, broad-chested, muscular, with a flawless coat and 2 bright, amber eyes that showed zero fear. He was a Tier 1 combat tracker dog, trained to detect things that no machine could find. "Colonel," Max said, his voice a steady, calm anchor in the middle of the chaos. "The machines are blind, but my boy isn't. If we stay here, the mortars will finish us in 10 minutes. Let us clear a lane." Yet Thompson looked at the open, exposed sand of the valley floor. Bullets were snapping through the air like angry hornets. Sending a dog into an active, ambushed minefield was a death sentence for the animal. Protocol dictated they wait for air support, but the air support was still 20 minutes out. "It's a suicide run for him, Max," Thompson growled, a heavy weight pressing into his chest. Max looked down at Rex. The dog looked back up at his handler, his tail giving a single calm thump against the dirt. There was an understanding between the 2 men and the animal that went beyond words. Rex didn't see the danger. He only saw his master's command. "He's a soldier, sir," Max whispered, his hands trembling slightly as he unlocked the heavy steel clasp on Rex's tactical harness. He leaned down, burying his face for a single second in the dog's neck, whispering into his ear, "Go, Rex. Find the path. Bring our boys home." With a sharp motion of Max's hand, Rex exploded into motion. The young German shepherd tore across the open sand like a streak of brown lightning. He didn't run blindly. His nose was down, his nostrils flaring as he sifted through the scent of burning fuel to find the specific chemical signature of buried military explosives. Thud! Thud! Bullets kicked up geysers of dust inches from Rex's paws, but he didn't falter. Suddenly, he froze, dropping his belly flat to the earth and pointing his muzzle directly at a patch of loose shale. A heavy anti-personnel pressure plate was hidden just an inch beneath the surface. "Mark!" Max yelled, throwing a small red flag onto the coordinate from his cover. Rex didn't wait. He pivoted, dashing 5 yards to the left, sniffing furiously, then dropping flat again. Another mine, then another. He was mapping an invisible, winding labyrinth of survival through the jaws of death. "Move! Single file! Step exactly where the dog stepped!" Thompson roared into his radio, his voice cracking. Following the invisible line mapped out by the frantic, brilliant movements of the single animal, the 400 trapped soldiers began to pull back. They moved in a tight, disciplined chain, carrying their wounded on their backs, retracing Rex's paw prints through the minefield as the mortars detonated harmlessly behind them. Rex was a precision instrument of salvation, his speed rewriting the fate of an entire battalion. The retreat was almost complete. Thompson was pulling up the rear guard alongside Max, covering the final withdrawal, but the enemy on the ridges realized their trap was failing. They focused their heavy machine gun fire directly onto the handler and the dog. A heavy caliber round struck the ground right beside Max. The concussive blast blew the old sergeant off his feet, throwing him into a shallow crater. As he fell, a jagged chunk of razor-sharp shrapnel sliced through his right shoulder, severing the main artery and crushing the bone. Max let out a terrible choked scream, collapsing into the dirt as his lifeblood began to soak into the sand. Hearing his handler's cry, Rex aborted his run. He didn't care about the mines, he didn't care about the bullets. He turned around, sprinting back through the dust to reach Max's side. But in his frantic rush to save his master, Rex stepped off the cleared perimeter lane. His rear paw hit a hidden dual-stage heavy fragmentation mine, a weapon designed to destroy light armored vehicles. The metallic click of the firing pin releasing echoed clearly through the canyon. Rex knew what that sound meant. His training had taught him that the moment a pressure plate activated, the blast would expand upward in a massive cone of lethal steel. If he leaped away, the explosion would detonate horizontally, shredding the unconscious Max and Colonel Thompson, who were lying less than 3 yards away. Rex didn't leap. Instead, the young K9 threw his entire 80-pound body downward, pinning his chest and face directly over the buried explosive, using his own flesh and muscle to smother the blast before it could expand. Boom! The muffled explosion shook the valley floor. The sheer force of the blast lifted Rex into the air, throwing his mutilated, bleeding body into the rocks. The explosion claimed his left eye, shattered his rear leg into splinters of bone, and tore deep trenches across his spine. But because he had smothered the mine, the lethal fragmentation was contained. Thompson and Max were shielded from the direct blast. Thompson, coughing through the black smoke, crawled over to Max, dragging the unconscious sergeant by his uniform collar while another surviving soldier reached out and scooped up Rex's broken, bloody form. They escaped the valley just as the American airstrikes arrived to flatten the ridges. They survived. The 400 boys went home to their families. But the real rot began in the sterile offices of Washington, D.C. The mission in Valley 7 had been a massive political embarrassment, an operation caused by a corrupt intelligence contractor with deep ties to the Senate. To protect the defense budgets and prevent a congressional investigation, the entire operation was scrubbed from the public record. It was classified under an absolute black file. The official paperwork stated that the battalion had undergone a standard tactical withdrawal. There was no ambush, there was no minefield, and there was no hero dog. Rex was stripped of his active service record. His status changed to classified asset, deceased, and he was discarded without a single military medical benefit. Max was given a cheap wooden arm, a forced retirement with a pathetic pension, and a strict non-disclosure agreement that promised a federal prison sentence if he ever spoke the truth about the 400 men his dog had saved. Thompson had spent 10 years climbing the ranks, earning his 4 silver stars, using every ounce of his political leverage just to find the sealed registry of K9-04. He had searched every veteran hospital, every shelter, and every military graveyard in the country looking for the ghost who had given him his life. Back in the present, the muddy rail yard, General Thompson slowly pulled his hand away from Rex's neck. He stood up, turning his head toward Arthur Miller. The fury in the general's eyes was no longer just a flash of anger. It was the cold, terrifying weight of 400 ghosts standing behind him in the rain. Miller was trembling so hard his gold rings rattled against the titanium shaft of his golf club. He looked at the heavily armed federal operators, then at the 4 silver stars on Thompson's coat. His voice was a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "General, I didn't know the history," Miller stammered, backing away until his spine hit the door of his luxury sedan. "The city council gave me the rezoning permits legally. The dog was reported as an uncollared, dangerous beast by the locals. I was just protecting my investment." "An uncollared beast?" Thompson's voice dropped into a dangerous whisper that cut through the sound of the wind. "The collar you just burned in that barrel carried a rank higher than anyone in your private security detail will ever achieve. You called him a monster because he has scars, but those scars are the only reason this country has a flag left to fly over your commercial real estate." The general turned to the tactical operators, his face hardening into granite. "Handcuff him right now. Charge him with felony assault on a disabled veteran, malicious destruction of federal military property, and unauthorized tampering with a classified national security zone. Seize his assets, impound the vehicles, and bring a forensics team to excavate this entire lot. If a single brick of this warehouse is touched before the tribunal, I will have his entire corporation locked in a federal brig." The operators moved like shadows. Within seconds, Miller's cashmere coat was forced into the mud. His arms slammed behind his back as the heavy steel handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. His security guards were stripped of their weapons and shoved into the back of the tactical vans. Their elite status evaporated in the face of true military authority. Thompson turned back to the ditch, where Max was weakly trying to sit up. His old lips blew from the cold. The general walked over, unbuttoning his own heavy, waterproof 4-star commander's coat, and draped it gently over the old man's shoulders. "The watch is over, Master Sergeant," Thompson said softly, his voice cracking as he helped his old comrade rise from the mud. "I found you, and nobody is taking your boy away ever again." The rain over the old industrial lot had begun to thin, turning into a cold, misty haze that hung low over the waterlogged gravel. The midnight black luxury sedan was violently hoisted onto the bed of a heavy military transport truck, its security alarms flashing uselessly against the bleak gray sky. Arthur Miller was dragged ruthlessly toward the rear of an armored transport van, his expensive cashmere coat ruined, his gold rings confiscated, and his pride completely shattered. He was no longer a powerful developer. He was a federal prisoner facing a treason-level military tribunal. But in the center of the rail yard, the atmosphere did not relax. It shifted into something deeply sacred, heavy with a quiet, suffocating reverence. 6 elite K-9 handlers from the federal task force stood in a rigid, flawless line, holding the heavy leather leads of their own service animals. These were the crown jewels of modern military policing: massive, pristine Belgian Malinois and German Shepherds, their chests broad, their coats gleaming, trained to attack with lethal precision on a single micro whistle. In front of this elite line stood Max and Rex. Max was wrapped tightly in General Thompson's heavy 4-star waterproof commander's coat, the dark fabric trailing in the dirt. He stood as straight as his elderly spine would allow, his single flesh-and-blood hand resting firmly on Rex's broad shoulder. Rex was battered, his coat matted with blood and mud, his crooked rear leg trembling slightly from the sheer exhaustion of the ordeal. He looked ancient, broken, and completely discarded. Miller, peering through the heavily barred window of the transport van, let out a desperate, bitter shout to the operators. "Look at that rabid animal! My dog would have torn him apart in seconds. He's a danger to the public. Why aren't you putting him down?" The handlers did not answer, but the dogs did, as Rex took a single agonizing, limping step forward to stand beside Max. A sudden, inexplicable phenomenon swept through the entire line of modern service animals. There was no barking. There was no aggressive growling. Instead, the lead Belgian Malinois, a fierce, 100-pound beast that had taken down armed cartel members without flinching, suddenly dropped its ears flat against its skull. Its tail tucked tightly beneath its body, and slowly, with a deep instinctual reverence, the animal dropped its front chest entirely to the wet gravel, extending its paws forward in a universal position of absolute submission. One by one, like a row of dominoes falling in the dark, all 6 of the highly trained, multi-million-dollar federal police dogs completely ignored their handler's tension. They dropped their heads into the mud, bowing down before the half-blind, crippled German shepherd standing before them. It was the biological recognition of an alpha, a silent, ancient code of the pack that recognized a king who had survived the fire of 100 battlefields. They weren't looking at a broken stray. They were looking at the ghost of Valley 7, the legend who had swallowed a landmine to keep 400 human hearts beating. The handlers stood frozen in absolute shock, their leads slack in their hands. Miller's jaw dropped so wide he could no longer form words, his face draining of all remaining color as the heavy steel doors of the van were slammed shut, locking him in the dark. General Thompson walked over to the rusted oil drum where the trash fire was dying out. He reached his heavy, leather-gloved hand deep into the hot ashes, completely ignoring the heat, and pulled out the blackened, twisted brass nameplate from Rex's melted collar. He walked back to the ditch, pulled a pristine, gold-plated tactical collar deeply engraved with the official crest of the Joint Special Operations Command from his pocket, and slid the original brass plate into its secure slot. Thompson knelt down, his boots sinking into the clay, and personally buckled the gold-plated collar around Rex's neck. The brass plate, though charred by the fire, caught the sharp white glare of the tactical spotlights, the serial number K9-04 gleaming with a quiet, eternal authority. The 4-star general stood up, his spine snapping into a line of absolute steel. His right hand flew to his brow, delivering a razor-sharp textbook military salute to the 65-year-old veteran and his half-blind dog. Click. In perfect unison, the 24 black-armored operators and the 6 K9 handlers slammed their rifle butts against the concrete, their arms snapping up into a massive wall-to-wall salute that cut through the fog. Max stood under the weight of the general's coat, the rain washing the mud from his split eyebrow. For the first time in 10 long years, the suffocating shadows of the black file were gone. His single hand rose slowly, his fingers trembling but locking into a proud, unwavering return salute. Beside him, Rex sat tall on his crooked leg, his single amber eye reflecting the flashing blue lights of the convoy, his head held high against the dying storm. In a world that is completely blind to anything that isn't wrapped in a clean uniform, an expensive title, or a polished exterior, it is incredibly easy to treat our true heroes like garbage. The greedy elite looked at a crippled veteran and a scarred, half-blind dog, and they saw a nuisance that needed to be erased from their real estate project. They called him a monster because of his scars, never realizing that those exact scars were the only reason their families were still safe at night. True honor cannot be bought with money, and it can never be erased by a politician's classified paperwork. It lives in the unbreakable bond between handlers and the animals who choose to lay down their lives in the dark so that others can see the light of dawn. Rex was stripped of his records, but he could never be stripped of his soul. Never judge a soldier by the worn-out clothes they wear or the limping stride they take. Because sometimes, the most magnificent kings are the ones hiding inside a broken shell, waiting for the truth to clear the sky. If the story of the faithful K9 and the old sergeant touched your heart today, leave a K9 in the comment section below to honor their unseen sacrifice. Don't forget to subscribe to Hidden Threads so you never miss another journey into the heart of silent honor. Until next time, stay loyal to those who stood by you in the dark.